Hello everyone, and welcome to today's video of Why is my generation's humor so f***ed? A video essay. If you've coursed through cyberspace long enough, then it's almost impossible to have missed that weird, bizarre, sometimes eerie part of the internet that people like to endearingly term millennial humor. You know the kind. You'll find it even in the mainstream comedy shows these days, typically from the Adult Swim network. The Eric Andre show or Rick and Morty come to mind. Or, and this is more likely, you've stumbled upon it in the niche tier 3 image memes that gloriously plague your social media feeds. More on tiers later. These are the posts that usually take on an unflattering screen cap of a 90s or early 2000s cartoon, like say SpongeBob, the VeggieTales gang, or Woody from Toy Story, with some nonsensical text and the image resolution lowered to oblivion. Like I said, if you're an internet user or you watch modern television, it comes with a package. It's very likely you've had your fair dose of this weird yet strangely addictive subgenre of comedy. So how did we end up here? At the risk of sounding like a total boomer, it just seems like such a stark contrast from the comedy of yesteryears, where jokes and media generally had a setup, a punchline, structure, and, you know, made sense. Like 90s comedy was defined by traditional sitcoms, the 2000s to early 2010s were defined by snarky assholes and mockumentaries, adult cartoons, or single camera shows. And all these jokes typically followed some understandable formula. They might be satirizing or parodying current events using observational humor, or simply impressing us with witty character banter or Seth MacFarlane-esque sex jokes. But recent years have introduced to us a new generation of surrealism comedy that plans to tear down everything we thought the genre to be, and boy, does it actually work. Now, I'm not saying that all elements of traditional comedy are completely non-existent in this day and age. A lot of comedies airing today still make use of your tried and true setups and punches and clever quips or zingers, while still managing to land with millennial viewers. Kinda do miss that laugh track though. It was nice being told exactly when to laugh. Less work for me. And it's not like a lot of these old shows have completely lost their comedic punch by today's standards. I mean, I'm still ready and willing to watch The Office for the 20th time and laugh my ass off at all the jokes I'm pretty much memorized at this point. But you've got to admit that we've entered an era of humor where simple jokes like this, you know, just won't make for virality anymore. No, what we want is Markiplier's face photoshopped into Lord Farquaad, photoshopped into Mark Zuckerberg at his congressional hearings, and then deep fried for artistic effect. Or Eric Andre dressed as an octopus and entering 5-star New York restaurants. And there you have it, some internet classics. So this got me curious. Why exactly is this style of comedy so prominent with my generation, and for all its nonsensical randomness, how exactly does it still manage to be this f***ing hilarious? And sure, you can say this type of comedy did have its fans in the late 90s, with yet again Adult Swim animations like Space Ghost, Aqua Teen Hunger Force, Harvey Birdman, but it wasn't as widely distributed or as mainstream as it is today. To properly explore this context behind surreal millennial humor, it's important to note these absurdist elements aren't exactly new in the world of art and media. In fact, its roots can be traced back to two influential art movements of the early 20th century, Dadaism and Surrealism. Alright, for those of you concerned this is about to turn into a 10th grade art class, don't worry, I'll keep this brief and to the point. Dadaism was an art movement that came about in the early 1910s. It began in Zurich, Switzerland, and was a reaction to the rising capitalist culture and nationalistic attitudes of the time alongside the horrors of World War I, aiming to question, mock, and contest general norms and conventions of the era, as well as fixed notions on what art is and what art should be. Dada artists embraced chaos, absurdity, meaninglessness, and humor in their works. Sounds pretty familiar. They formed a movement that rejected all traditions and restrictions of art making, placing less priority on aesthetics and more focus on appearing controversial or even offensive. Surrealism was a similar movement, though it came later in 1924 and brought with it plenty of artists who had participated in the Dada movement. While it also took pride in its lack of logic and reason, Surrealists took their artwork a bit more seriously and were less about being anti-art and more about bringing context to abstract ideas of the subconscious mind. They thus took plenty of their inspiration from Sigmund Freud and had a lot of works that revolved around dreams and the mysteries of the subliminal. So with this bit of history in mind, we can definitely see where the dank millennial humor of today gets its influence from. Low-res stills of 90s shows or disturbingly compelling series like YouTube's Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared may come off as random, how is this shit supposed to be funny type of content for some, but its precise goal is to entertain or highlight through overly exaggerated means the often unexplainable chaos and madness of modern life. Just as Dadaism and Surrealism's concepts were originally in response to the brewing social and economic issues of the time, so too is the weird, absurd millennial humor that's risen to prominence as of late. My generation is truly fascinating, and not to toot our own horn, but there is a reason why we're one of the most studied demographics in recent years. Not only are we youngins responsible for some of the most iconic and weirdest trends of years past, these including our obsession with avocados, our persistence with bringing back everything 90s from the fashion to actual cartoons, or some of the most hilarious additions to the worldwide lexicon. But we're also known, and this is probably our most defining characteristic, for straying or outright rejecting the traditional norms and structures of the generations before us. Hey, that sounds like too particular art movements I just talked about. This isn't limited to social issues, though we have been quite opinionated and active with those as well, but mainly the once concrete values held dearly by Generation X and the baby boomers. For one thing, we're getting married and having kids at a much later stage, and some of us aren't even thinking of getting married at all, let alone starting a family. We're definitely far less religious or completely unaffiliated with religion. We're drawn less to corporate culture and more so the gig economy. And most of us are still living with our parents. So you can definitely say we've got some unique characteristics compared to that of previous generations. Because a lot of us no longer hold on to these preconceived societal norms and structures, we've often been labeled a more cynical, critical, and some would even say nihilistic bunch. And why is this? Well, for a good lot of us, a lot of the promises we were given and the perceptions we were taught at a very young age didn't quite hold up as well as we thought once adulthood kicked in. Times are different in both an economic and social sense. A good college degree doesn't always mean a long-lasting career. Alternative views and a wider breadth of perspectives have pushed us toward a trend of non-religiosity, and with news and information more readily accessible than ever, we've come to be less trusting of media and authority figures, these including politicians, corporations, celebrities, and even the educational system. According to studies from the US, the Great Recession of the late 2000s had older millennials plowing through a ton of financial struggles that even made it hard to afford staples like healthcare or housing. This contributed to the previous trends I mentioned of delayed families or delaying moving out. And with yet another global recession due to recent doomsday events, millennials in general are about to get into even deeper shit. If not already. Alright, so why does all this matter? How does any of this tie into the absurdity of humor today? Why are you giving us another history lesson? Well, that's because, like the artists under the Dadaism and Surrealism movement, this craziness, chaos, and unpredictability of adult life, a stark contrast from our once optimistic hopes of how things would turn out, have molded us into a generation willing to reject or contest the current system. And similarly to the works of Dadaists, a lot of us decided to find humor, and by extension comfort, in all the bullshit, meaninglessness, and emptiness of modern life through meaningless, surreal memes and comedy. And this all takes me to the comedy of today. We got there eventually. And why these fever dream compilations of Mini Shrek or clips of Eric Andre in a centaur suit are now considered quality humor. Given the pessimistic realities of the world, this type of comedy does give us a pretty effective form of escapism. But rather than rejecting or avoiding the chaos altogether, it sort of grabs it by the horns and turns it on its head, embracing the nonsensical ways of life, you could say, or attempting to own the absurdity with even greater absurdity. And this no-holds-barred genre of comedy grants comedians and creators an incredibly flexible space to play around with. From trippy yet lighthearted concepts to incredibly strange, dark, and even eerie ideas. Tim Heidecker and Eric Wareham, also known as the legends Tim and Eric, are masters of this, toying with all kinds of surreal themes in their numerous programs for Adult Swim. In this now widely cited 2017 article by Elizabeth Brunig for the Washington Post, Wareham best described the type of comfort that millennials take in this type of bizarro humor with his quote, "It feels interesting to live in that surreal moment versus the horror of reality sometimes. It's an expression of that fear and anxiety. I just feel like it's fun to watch a show and you're transported to another dimension of similar things, but it's not real, so you're just like, ah, it's a pleasant surreal world." As Brunig further puts it, there's also a relief, an invitation to laugh at the awkward and absurd. This genre of humor also accurately represents that common modern notion of nothing really matters in the grand scheme of things, at least. If life doesn't play by any preconceived rules, then why should comedy? Of course, it's worth noting that there are different levels to the absurdist comedy of today. Not all of them are as illogical and abstract as, say, Tim and Eric skits. Some choose to simply appropriate elements of absurdity or surrealism while tackling relevant subject matters in a more straightforward manner. This allows creators to create a more consciously relatable subset of surreal humor rather than solely focusing on escapism. Take Rick and Morty, for example. This show is no stranger to your weird and literally out-of-this-world sci-fi concepts, but still manages to weave in some pretty poignant, sometimes nihilistic messages in between. A particular on-the-nose example of this was when the two leads were forced to leave their timeline, overrun by Cronenberg people hybrids, and escape to a new one where they had accidentally died and proceeded to bury their alternate selves in order to take their place. The whole incident was incredibly trippy, dark, and disturbing, and when Morty eventually reveals the graves of Rick's and his own body in their own backyard, he shares one of the most memorable and thematically fitting lines of the show.
"Nobody exists on purpose. Nobody belongs anywhere. Everybody's gonna die. Come watch TV."
Or take Bojack Horseman, an animated sitcom that imagines a world where humans and anthropomorphic animals live side by side without question. It's a bizarre universe of melded human and animal practices, yet it delves into some pretty deep, relevant real-life themes like existentialism and even depression. Both of these shows still play around with the perceived structureless, chaotic nonsense of the world, but use this as a vehicle to drive some actually well-structured stories and topical messages that leave an impact on our generation. This subset of modern humor attempts to find meaning in the senselessness around us rather than expressing it themselves or embracing it altogether. But let's not forget an incredibly important ingredient in this whole culture of strange millennial humor, and that's the role of the dank-ass memes. One can even say that television or even movie comedies of today owe much of their influence to the crazy, anarchic nature of internet humor. Even Andrew DeYoung, a one-time editor of The Eric Andre Show, admitted that Adult Swim's off-the-wall and wacky lineup were meant to reflect the frenetic distribution of information on the internet, and that's why a lot of their shows are so chaotic and absurd. The memes of the internet have contributed significantly in cultivating the ridiculousness and absurdity of modern comedy. And this is because it actually invites and encourages people to get in on the action. And who better to express the chaos of millennial life than millennials themselves? One only needs a one-time trip to Know Your Meme or r/dank memes, or God forbid 4chan, to discover the thousands upon thousands of popular viral memes, whether in the form of phrases like
You like jazz?
or images of Jimmy Neutron's dad that excel at both being bizarre and unexplainably funny. Actually ashamed at how hard I laughed at that. Distortion is a key thing to note here. Oftentimes you'll have someone create a witty yet still somewhat sensible meme, only to have it warped and twisted in every way imaginable with each new iteration to the point where it hardly even resembles the original source or message. And I guess that's the point, because each new nonsensical twist seems to add new levels of hilarity to the joke, at least in my opinion. It's almost as if the less meaning there is, the funnier it gets, which I guess makes sense given the topic of this video. In fact, if you remember me mentioning it very briefly earlier, there are actually 3 different tiers to memery, if you can believe it. That's right, I did some deep research into this very serious subject. Tier 1 or entry-level memes are pretty much the basic bitches of the hierarchy. These are the memes that usually come from a template of bold text at the top and bottom of the image. According to Kyle Kirkpatrick of Beckerman, they're admittedly the worst kind of meme, but an important stepping stone for those willing to try out the lifestyle. Tier 2 memes are an upgrade from your typical bold texted template and usually combine 2 well-known internet memes together, creating a sort of online in-joke. Kirkpatrick also notes that this tier tends to rely on more ironic, snarky spins in everyday situations, celebrities, or prominent events. And finally, we've come to Tier 3, or what I'd like to consider God tier memes. The internet joke's danker than the public toilet at your local McDonald's. These are the memes that define the neo-Dadaist humor of our generation. The low-res images, though, forever haunt even your nightmares. They pride in the illogical, and that's exactly what makes them hilarious. And alright, so I've pretty much gone through both the historical and cultural context of why today's humor seems to constantly feel like a drug trip, and I keep repeating just how much I and the rest of us find it funny, but why is that? There's no sense to these jokes, and yet, why is it so entertaining? And now I've come to the last section of my video, and for all of you guys who have made it this far, I love you. Platonically. But the last question that I wanted to address regarding this topic is, why exactly is this type of comedy funny? Or in other words, where is the comedy? As I said earlier, the humor is directly derived from the lack of logical structure. One of the things we're naturally wired to find funny is the subversion of expectations. We humans are generally bound to find amusement in things we don't see coming, the element of surprise, if you will. These nonsensical yet unpredictable jokes work, because, well, predictable ones just turn out boring. It's why dad jokes are so commonly mocked, because they sound like something you've read out of a scholastic joke book 100 times. Or why that one science sitcom isn't funny, because the writers keep going for low-hanging fruit. The unexpected is key in making us laugh, or at the very least, entertaining us, because it shatters our preconceived rules and standards of how things should work or play out, in a way that's not threatening, of course. The absurdism of today basically emphasizes this to extremes and knocks down every expectation we have of comedic norms, having us laugh at all the strange, unexplainable twists. I think this Redditor said it best on r/explain like I'm 5 at their comment. You're throwing something really unexpected in as the punchline, something so unexpected it actually has no relation to the whole setup of the joke. You're laughing at the gotcha moment and the oddness of such an unrelated element being dragged into the joke out of nowhere. It can even be more effective when there's a long and elaborate setup, causing you to pay attention as you try and catch all the details, thinking you can predict how the joke will end, only for it to be a purple monkey dishwasher. And there you have it. I've now committed the cardinal sin of humor, and that's to analyze and explain the joke, so You're welcome. You can now laugh at all the future weird memes with the prideful knowledge of the history and recent events that got us here, or I've completely ruined the fun of it by trying to make sense out of the senseless. Either way, thank you so much for sticking around till the end of this video. If you enjoyed it, drop a like or maybe even subscribe. Hey, that's a fun idea. I had a ton of fun making this video, and I'm now ready to annoy all my friends with all the Eric Andre quotes now ingrained in my brain. Who are your favorite absurdist comedians or favorite surreal comedies? Let me know in the comments, and if there are any other strange or interesting areas of the internet or pop culture that you'd like me to explore, go ahead and let me know too. And I'll catch you guys in the next video.